Bethlehem and the Messiah. What is the connection? Micah 5 verse 2 versus Matthew 2 verse 6. Messianic prophecy fulfilled in Jesus?
Shalom from the Holy Land, everybody. Welcome to the 5th video in the series. Today we are in a beautiful place here in Israel. Behind me you can see one of the castles that King Herod lived in. During the time of King Herod, the New Testament says that Magi, wise men from the east, came to him and asked him where the King of the Jews was born. Of course, King Herod didn't like this question at all, because it was a threat to his throne. Let's take a closer look to the famous story that the New Testament gives us in the Gospel of Matthew that we hear around Christmas time every year.
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel."
This is an incredibly unbelievable story. The New Testament claims that finally the Messiah is born in the city of Bethlehem. And Herod and all Jerusalem with him is highly disturbed. The Gospel of Matthew connects this event, this story, to the book of Micah in the Old Testament and says that another prophecy about the Messiah is fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth. King Herod calls all the chief priests and the teachers of the law to find out where the Messiah must be born. Let's put this story in its historical context. Imagine this. The state of Israel is ruled and occupied by the Roman Empire. There's a Gentile king Herod, not from the house of David, and the Jewish people are being oppressed. The Jewish people are waiting, expecting, longing for the Messiah to come, to save them from this oppressor and to become finally king over Israel, since the last kingdom ended 400 years ago. The expectation for the coming of the Messiah in those days was extremely high. And finally, the New Testament announced that the new King of the Jews is born. The New Testament testifies that all Jerusalem is disturbed and in excitement. And King Herod calls all the Torah scholars to find out where the Messiah, the King of the Jews, must be born. And according to the New Testament, they say that the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem. And what happened next? Nothing. Nothing. Nothing happens. Unbelievable. After 2000 years of waiting for the Messiah, living under oppression from the brutal Roman Empire, the King of the Jews is born in Bethlehem. All Jerusalem is talking about it. And the only people that are going to look are the 10 wise men from the far east. And the Jews that are waiting, expecting, longing for the Messiah, telling King Herod where the King of the Jews must be born, while all Jerusalem is excited and talking about it. The Jewish people they don't go to check it out? That's really an unbelievable story. It's hard to believe, if you know what I mean. I had my education in a Christian primary school and a Christian high school, and I heard all the stories of the New Testament. And of course, this story was on the menu around Christmas time every year. And it always highly disturbed me that the Jewish people didn't go to check it out. I'm living in Israel right now, and people longing for the Messiah these days. If the Prime Minister think that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, might be born, and calling all the big rabbis to ask where the Messiah will be born, and the rabbis will tell the Messiah will be born right now in Bethlehem, I can assure you the whole nation will run to Bethlehem to at least check if this is true.
Micah versus Matthew. Messianic prophecy fulfilled in Jesus? But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting.
It's very puzzling that the Jewish people didn't go out to check. The newborn King Messiah is born, and nobody goes to check. How on earth is this possible? It doesn't make sense at all. And let's also look what the Gospel of Luke has to say about this event.
There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zachariah, of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless.
In the book of Luke, the New Testament describes the following situation. The New Testament in the Gospel of Luke claims that the family of Mary were priests and came from the tribe of Levi, and they were righteous people. The New Testament describes that the family, the aunt and the uncle of Mary, Zachariah and Elizabeth, were priests. Zachariah was serving in the Holy Temple. He knew the Old Testament very well. According to the New Testament, these two people were righteous people, living according to all the laws blamelessly. And one of the principles in Judaism is that you need to expect the Messiah every day. According to the New Testament, they knew that Mary was carrying the Messiah inside of her. Couldn't they advise Mary to go to Bethlehem to give birth over there? But it is highly remarkable that nobody comes to the idea to send Mary to Bethlehem to give birth. In fact, the Gospel of Luke describes that it took an entire census. The Emperor August requires the counting of all the Jewish people just for Jesus of Nazareth to be born in Bethlehem. Joseph and Mary, together with their righteous family, probably didn't know that the Messiah needed to be born in Bethlehem at all. Otherwise, they would have been traveling themselves to Bethlehem to fulfill the prophecy of Micah and Jesus of Nazareth. The question is why Joseph and Mary didn't go by themselves early to prepare a place for Mary to give birth in a normal way. Now they were forced to go to Bethlehem, and there was no place, and she needed to give birth in a stable outside in the fields. From a Christian point of view, it's startling that the righteous family of Joseph and Mary that followed all the commandments of the Lord didn't have a clue that the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem. From a Christian point of view, this is quite remarkable. But from a Jewish point of view, Not at all. As we can read between the lines in the Gospel of Luke, there is no expectation whatsoever in Judaism that the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem. That the Messiah needs to be born in Bethlehem is a pure Christian invention, and it's only based on the first book of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew. And that's exactly the reason why Joseph and Mary didn't go on their own to Bethlehem. And it's also the reason why the righteous family, the priest Zachariah and his wife Elizabeth, that knew the Torah, the Tanakh, the Old Testament very well, didn't advise them to go to Bethlehem. Because simply nowhere in the Tanakh, that what Christians call the Old Testament, it is written that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Let's examine the verse that the New Testament quotes as a proof text that the Messiah needs to be born in Bethlehem, according to the Gospel of Matthew. Let's put this text from Micah in its Hebrew and historical context.
The Bethlehem prophecy revealed. Micah 5 verse 2 exposed. King David or Jesus?
Do you know the game Search for the Differences? It's a kids game. They put seemingly two identical pictures, but they leave some items out, or they color some parts in a different color. And the kids needs to look for the differences. Let's play this game. We put a text from Micah, spoken by God himself through the mouth of the prophet Micah, from the Tanakh, from the Old Testament. And we put what's supposed to be the same quote from the Prophet Micah in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Matthew, and we search for the differences.
But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be a ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting. And you, Bethlehem Ephratah, you should have been the lowest of the clans of Judah. From you he shall emerge for me to be a ruler over Israel, and his origin is from the old, from days of yore, from ancient days.
When we read carefully the quote given by the New Testament from Micah 5, we see immediately a remarkable fact. First of all, we see that the New Testament leaves out the word Ephratah. That we see it's written in Micah 5 verse 1.
Where is the word Ephratah?
The New Testament in the Gospel of Matthew reads just Bethlehem, while in Micah 5 verse 1 it reads Bethlehem Ephratah.
Secondly, in Micah it says, you are little, while the New Testament says, you are not the least. And third, the second part of the verse is totally left out by the New Testament. Where is the sentence, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting? The New Testament leaves it totally out. Matthew 2 verse 6. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Micah 5 verse 2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be a ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting.
And last but not least, the Christian Church translate the words from ancient days into from everlasting.
The Christian Church translates, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting. But the Hebrew Bible says, from days of yore, from ancient days.
Well, as a Jew that knows his Hebrew scriptures, I have three questions. The first question, why the New Testament changes God's original spoken words from the Prophet Micah?
Why the New Testament changes God's words?
It first leaves out the word Ephrata, and after it's written both in the Christian and in the Hebrew translations, you are little. But the New Testament writes, you are not the least. Why? That's something totally different than that God says in the Tanakh. That's what you call the Old Testament. The second question, why the New Testament only quotes the first part? And why the New Testament leaves out the second part of Micah 5 verse 1?
Why the New Testament leaves out the second part of Micah 5 verse 1?
And third, why the Christian Church is changing the words from ancient times into from everlasting.
Hebrew from ancient days. Christian Church from everlasting.
And you expect us, Jewish people, to believe this? Why the New Testament doesn't copy-paste the words of God as is? The key to understand Micah 5 verse 1 is to understand the Hebrew word hamotzi, who brings forth, who will be a ruler.
Hamotzi is brings forth.
God himself says in the Tanakh, in Micah 5 verse 1, that Bethlehem Ephrata will bring forth a leader, a ruler, and that is the right connection. Look,
Bethlehem will bring forth a leader. And David was the son of this Ephrathite man from Bethlehem of Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons. And the man was old in Saul's time, coming among men. And Saul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David said, The son of your bondsman, Jesse, the Bethlehemite.
Micah 5 verse 1 doesn't speak about the birthplace of the Messiah at all. Micah 5 verse 1 speaks about bringing forth a ruler, the Messiah. From the context, it's clear that Micah 5 verse 1 speaks about David and his family and the tribe he comes from the tribe of Judah. Micah 5 verse 1 says that the Messiah will emerge, that the Messiah will come forth from King David, from the tribe of Judah, and from the family of Jesse, the Ephrathite man from Bethlehem. Exactly the word Ephrata that the New Testament leaves out.
The New Testament leaves out the word Ephrata.
Nowhere in the Tanakh, that what Christians call the Old Testament, it is written that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. It is a pure New Testament and Christian invention that has no base whatsoever in the Tanakh. God never said in the Old Testament that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Let that sink in.
Why do you believe what you believe? Do you believe in the New Testament because it's true? Or is the New Testament true because you believe in it? What does the Bible really say?
Micah 5 verse 1 says, though you are small, you are little. But the New Testament writes, you are not the least. Why? Why, O New Testament, do you always change and twist the words of our God spoken in the Tanakh? That's what Christians call the Old Testament. Bethlehem wasn't the smallest city at all. So the question is, why the Old Testament call Bethlehem small? The answer is because Ruth, the Moabite, she came from Bethlehem Ephrata, and she was the great-grandmother of King David. Ruth gave birth to Obed, and Obed was the father of Jesse and the grandfather of King David. Why she was called little, small? The reason is because Ruth was a Moabite, and a Moabite could not belong to the assembly of Israel. The reason is when the nation of Israel traveled in the desert, the Moabites didn't provide them food and water. And as a punishment, God said that the Moabite could not belong to the assembly of Israel. How was it possible then that Ruth converted to Judaism and yes, belonged to the nation of Israel? We can find out by understanding the Hebrew language. It is written in Hebrew, Moavi, and that is a Moabite man. And it's not written Moabit, which is a Moabite woman. Also, a Moabite woman didn't leave the house in that time. It were the men that were responsible. And the men didn't provide food and drink. And so, only the men were punished.
Moabite men couldn't belong to the nation of Israel.
Ruth the Moabite was a ger, a Jewish convert to Judaism. Although there is no difference whatsoever by being Jewish, born through a Jewish mother, or being Jewish by an Orthodox conversion, with for women and men learning the Torah laws, the customs, and the culture. Also cleansing in a ritual bath called the mikveh. And for men only for men, Brit Milah, circumcision. And this all checked by an Orthodox rabbinical court. So through the Giyur process, Ruth became fully Jewish.
Yet Ruth and her descendants
Were looking down on in Israel. Not because he was a convert. Because David became king while his great-grandmother belonged to the Moabites. And that is the reason why Bethlehem is called small, little, among the families of Judah. But, as God says himself, through the mouth of the prophet Micah, ultimately, the Messiah will emerge from King David.
that was a descendant from Ruth.
The ger, the convert into Judaism. And that is the right connection. Finally, the last question that needs to be answered is why in the Old Testament the Christian church mistranslate the words from ancient days into from everlasting.
From ancient days to everlasting, Micah's prophecy. What does God's Holy Scripture really say? The Holy Torah versus New Testament. The Christian Church translation writes from everlasting, but the original Hebrew says from days of yore, which is from ancient days.
The big question is, why the Christian Church, that also sees Micah 5 verse 1 as a proof text that the Messiah needs to be born in Bethlehem, like the New Testament does, changes God's original words from ancient days into from everlasting, from eternity. And the answer is that now the New Testament reader reads in Micah 5 verse 1 Jesus of Nazareth instead of King David. Well, I know that my Christian brothers and sisters really believe that the Jewish people are blind and that the eyes of the Jewish people are covered, so we won't recognize the Christian Messiah, Jesus from Nazareth, in our holy Hebrew text. As the Apostle Paul writes it in his book Romans 11 verse 25.
For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, and to the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Well, I actually don't know if to laugh or to cry.
This belief, used by the New Testament and the Christian Church, is a great tool to explain away theological problems and most questions that might be asked. They just answer, the Jewish people are blind and their eyes are covered. Problem solved. End of argument. Well, let me assure you this, my dear Christian brothers and sisters. With all the respect, but we, the Jewish people, are not blind at all. The Tanakh, that what you are calling the Old Testament, was given to us, the Jewish people. And we, the Jewish people, know our Hebrew text and our historical context perfectly well, better than anyone else. I will tell you a secret. The real problem is that you are reading a corrupted and mistranslated text from God's original spoken words to the Jewish prophets in the Old Testament. We saw this in the video about the virgin birth, and we will see it in the video today, and we will see it again, and again.
Micah 5 verse 2. The Messiah's eternal origin. Fact or fiction?
I will now share with you an amazing, beautiful insight that I learned from my rabbi, Tovia Singer.
Rabbi Tovia Singer, Kavod Harav, rightly points out the following.
According to Christianity, Jesus from Nazareth predates the creation and is equal to the Father. I will read for you now Article 10 of the Confession of Faith. I need to read it because I don't know it by heart. And it says, and I quote, "We believe that Jesus Christ, according to his divine nature, is the only begotten Son of God, begotten from eternity, not made nor created, for then he should be a creature, but co-essential and co-eternal with the Father. the express image of his person, and the brightness of his glory, equal unto him in all things.
Therefore the prophet Micah said, his going forth hath been from of old, from everlasting, and the apostle he had neither beginning of days nor end of life. He therefore is that true, eternal, and almighty God, whom we invoke, worship, and serve. This is Article 10.
By corruptly mistranslating God's original words to the prophet Micah, the Christian Church has now a proof for the dogma of the Trinity in the Tanakh, what you call the Old Testament. It is now written in Micah 5 verse 1. And the New Testament reader reads now the following.
But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me he that is to be a ruler in Israel, whose going forth hath been from of old, from everlasting.
That now the New Testament reader reads in Micah 5 verse 1, Jesus of Nazareth, instead of King David. We see that Micah 5 verse 1 is also quoted in Article 10 of the Confession of Faith. Unfortunately, with a corrupt and misleading translation of God's original spoken words to the prophet Micah, because the word eternity is not to be found in the text of Micah 5 verse 1 at all.
The word eternity or everlasting does not appear in Micah 5 verse 2.
Apparently, my dear Christian brothers and sisters, you are reading a totally different text than the original Hebrew text spoken by God himself to his prophets. Look.
And thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, you should have been the lowest of the clans of Judah. From you he shall emerge from me, to be a ruler over Israel, and his origin is from old, from days of yore. This is to say, from ancient days.
The prophet Micah prophesied far after King David, in the time of prophet Isaiah. Micah says that the Messiah has his origins in ancient days, in King David, from the tribe of Judah, and his family that came from Bethlehem Ephratah. King David that lived way before the prophet Micah. King David is not from eternity, he is from ancient days. But the church and the New Testament wants you to read Jesus from Nazareth in this text. And Jesus from Nazareth, according to the New Testament and according to the church, is from eternity, from everlasting, and not from all days. By corruptly changing and corruptly translating God's original words, it is now written in your Christian Old Testament. The right translation from the Hebrew words needs to be from ancient days, from old days, and not from eternity, and not from everlasting. And then the text gets a whole different meaning.
The million-dollar question: who is right? The Christian church or the original Hebrew text spoken by God himself?
How can we be sure that the Hebrew words Mimei Haolam really means from ancient days and not perhaps from eternity? You shouldn't trust me. After all, who am I? You don't know me. You should trust only the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. And you should trust only what God says in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. The question is, what does the Bible really say? Well, we can easily find this out to apply the clear and consistent method that Rabbi Tovia Singer introduced to us. We look up the Hebrew word in other places in the Tanakh and we check how the Christian church is translating the same Hebrew word over there. This is how we compare the translations. Luckily, the Hebrew word Mimei Haolam occurs in many other places in the Tanakh. And guess what? Guess how the Christian translators translate the same word in other places in the Tanakh. Let's look. First, we stay very close to our context and we look up a place in the book of Micah where the same word appears.
Lead your people with your rod, the flock of your inheritance who dwell alone, a forest in the midst of a fruitful field, and they shall graze in Bashan and in Gilead, as in days of yore. This is from ancient days. Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your heritage, who dwell solitarily in the woodland, in the midst of the Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and in Gilead, as in days of old.
In this verse from Micah, we see that the Christian Bible translators correctly translate the Hebrew word Mimei Olam with from old days. My question is, why in Micah 5 verse 1 they translate the same word with from everlasting? Maybe it is a coincidence. Let's look at another example from the Prophet Malachi.
And then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasant to the Lord, as in the days of old and former years. Then shall the offering of Judah and of Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord, as in the days of old and as in former years.
Also in this verse from the Prophet Malachi, we see that the Christian Bible translators following the Hebrew Bible and translating correctly with from old days. So the question rises, why also in this text from the Prophet Malachi, the Christian church is translating in the right way and following the Hebrew Bible translation. But only in Micah 5 verse 1, they translate it in a different way, with from everlasting. And the last example from the prophet Amos.
On that day I will raise up the fallen tabernacle of David, and I will close up their breaches, and I will raise up its ruins, and I build it up as in the days of yore. This is from ancient days. In that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old.
We see that also in this text from the prophet Amos, the Christian church and the Bible translators are translating the word in the correct way, from old days, like the Hebrew Bible. The big question, my dear Christian brothers and sisters, is why the Christian church in the book of Prophet Micah and in all other places in the Tanakh correctly translate the Hebrew words Mimei Haolam with from old days, but only in the text of Micah 5 verse 1 translate with from everlasting. We prove that they know how to translate, but only in Micah 5 verse 1 they choose to put a corrupt, misleading translation of God's original word spoken by the prophets in the Tanakh. Let that sink in.
Why do you believe what you believe? Do you believe in Christianity because it's the truth? Or is Christianity true because you believe in it? What does the Bible really say?
It is a fact that Micah 5 verse 1 doesn't speak about the Christian Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. And it doesn't speak about the birthplace of the Messiah. Instead, it speaks about King David, the tribe of Judah, and his family that came from Bethlehem Ephrata from old days. It must be very clear that the claim that through the birth of Jesus from Nazareth in Bethlehem, another Messianic promise was fulfilled in Jesus from Nazareth is false and has no base in the Tanakh. Nowhere in the Old Testament says that the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem. Another text from which the New Testament claims to be Messianic and come true in Jesus from Nazareth falls away. In one of the previous videos, we spoke about the trick of the serpent, the trick of the snake in paradise. The snake said to Eve, "Has God not said?" And it's slightly but completely different. The New Testament and the Christian church is doing exactly the same. They're changing God's original word spoken to his prophets in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, so that it fits to their dogmas and their beliefs. And you really expect us, the Jewish people, that know the Hebrew text and the historical context, that we can believe in a mistranslated and corrupted translated word of our holy scriptures? I don't think so. It must be obvious that we, the Jewish people, cannot believe in the New Testament and not in the Christian church and not in the Christian Messiah, Jesus from Nazareth. We are the priests of the world, and it's our responsibility to teach the nations. We are not blind at all, and our eyes are not covered. We know our Hebrew text, and the whole problem is that you, and I'm very sorry to say, you are reading a corrupted, translated text from God's original word. The New Testament and the Christian Bible translators trying to get Jesus from Nazareth into the Hebrew scriptures using false translations. Well, Jesus from Nazareth is really not there. If you only read the New Testament and you only read the text that the New Testament tells you to read with the church translation, yes, then you will find Jesus from Nazareth in your Old Testament. But when you read the Tanakh in its original Hebrew text, then you will not find your Christian Messiah, Jesus from Nazareth, in the holy Hebrew scriptures. You will find Jesus from Nazareth only one time in the Tanakh. But this is for a different upcoming video. As a result, we do believe in the same God. We do believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the God of Israel. The big question is, do you serve him in the right way?
As it is written by the prophet Zechariah, "And the Lord shall become king over all the earth. On that day shall the Lord be one, and his name one. B'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad, u'shmo echad." Join me for the next video, the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. Not everybody can claim to be the Messiah. Lineage matters for Messianic claim.
Please subscribe to the channel so you will find out an amazing insights in the next upcoming video. Please like, share, follow, and comment. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, may he bless you in your journey and bring you to the right destination. Shalom from the Holy Land.